each other. And because they are by the sea, they were able to access cultures and ideas and goods from all around the world. Okay? Then across the Mediterranean, you have a place called Carthage. Here is Italy, Sicily, okay? An island called Sicily. Sicily is important because it's basically the main island of the Mediterranean. So you want to control the Mediterranean Sea and the trade, and to control Sicily. All right? So across the sea is Carthage. And Carthage is it's a colony of Phoenicia, which is in the Levant, okay? And over the next few years, Carthage would become the dominant economic power of the Mediterranean because they're very good at trade, they're very good at sailing. Okay? So they'll travel and sail all around the world and found new colonies, and slowly they'll build up their own little empire across the Mediterranean. And they are, for the longest time, the wealthiest city in Europe, basically. Okay? And of course, over here are the Greeks, right? And we spent a lot of time discussing the Greeks. So around this time, about 500 BCE, if you look at these three major civilizations, right? Or sorry, actually, there's actually four, right? The Etruscans, the Greeks, the Carthaginians, and then these Romans. No one could expect or predict that the Romans would become the great empire that it did become, right? So what we'll look at the first class is how did Rome become so powerful? And the easy answer is it's good at war. It's really good at war. And then the question then is, well, why is it good at war? Why is it better than the Greeks or the Carthaginians? And the answer is because the Romans are not afraid to die, and because the Romans have a different conception of citizenship than the Greeks. Okay, remember the Greeks were extremely jealous of citizenship. It was very hard to become an Athenian. It was very hard to become a Spartan. You basically have to be born into the polis. Same thing with the Carthaginians. They were not as strict as the Greeks. They were pretty flexible as well. They were very proud of being a citizen. Rome, because it was the poorest and smallest, it had no choice. If you wanted to immigrate to Rome, they welcomed you as a citizen. And as such, they could, throughout its history, draw on the vast manpower pool in the surrounding areas. Okay? And as such, with their almost unlimited manpower resources, they could eventually overwhelm the Greeks and the Carthaginians and become the dominant. Power in the Mediterranean. Why about 200 BC? Okay, that's the easy answer, and that's what most historians and most scholars believe. But I want to be more precise. Okay, I want to show you that ultimately it's the value system, or what is known as the character, of these different.
So ultimately determine their states and cities. Okay, does that make sense? Alright, so about 500 BCE, Rome was a republic, and at this time, the Etruscan culture is dominating Rome. In fact, for 3 out of Rome's 7 kings previously were Etruscan. Okay, so culturally and traditionally speaking, the Etruscans have a huge impact on Rome. But because Rome is very good at war, it's slowly able to expand and conquer the Etruscans and basically control all of Italy. Okay? And because the Romans are expansionists by nature, they are warlike people, they are basically a war machine. They now want to control um, Sicily and the Pope. Okay? And this brings them in conflict which is unique. Because remember, Greece and the economy, they're going to either on island or near the Pope. Because that's what allows them to trade, also connect with the Greek diaspora around the Mediterranean and the EU. And in about 280, the Greeks in southern Italy, they call for help. And remember, at this time, the Greek world is strongest throughout the world. Okay? So Alexander conquered most of the world, and his generals now control most of the territory. And one of his successors is Alexander was Pyrrhus. Okay? He decides this is an opportunity for him to build his own empire. So he responds to the Greeks who call for help against Rome. Okay? So Rome is threatening the Greeks in southern Italy. The Greeks are asking for help from the compatriots. Pyrrhus comes with an army to help his compatriots. And remember, at this time, the Greeks have the best military in the world because of the hoplite battles. And Pyrrhus is destroying the Romans. Battle after battle, Pyrrhus is destroying and decimating the Romans. Eventually, Pyrrhus says this: wow, I'm winning so many wars, I'm winning so many battles, and if I continue to win battles, I will be completely outmatched. I don't know more soldiers left. Okay? And this is where the phrase period victory comes from, right? You can win, but the cost of victory are so high, you might as well have lost. Alright? And so what this means is, even though the Romans were militarily inferior to the Greeks, the Romans weren't afraid to die, and they inflicted so many casualties on the Greeks that the Greeks eventually had to withdraw. Okay? And this will start many centuries of war between the Romans and the Greeks. Remember, at this time, in the beginning, the Greeks are wealthier, more numerous, and more militarily dominant than the Romans. But eventually, because of the Roman way of war, Rome will eventually conquer the Greeks. Okay? So that's the Greeks. Eventually, the Romans have Sicily. And this brings them into direct conflict with Carthage. This starts what is called the First Punic War. Now, there's a problem. Carthage is a naval power. Rome is a land power. Rome has no navy. So what Rome does is, slowly over time, they build their own navy. And at first, it sucks. They lose a lot of ships. And so the Romans build more ships. And they get slaughtered by the Carthaginians at sea. So they build more ships and more ships and more ships. Eventually, they overwhelm the Carthaginians. And so, after 20 years of war, in what's called the First Punic War, Rome becomes
dominant naval power in the Mediterranean. Almost becomes satellite. Something strange happened. Okay? Carthage is a trading power, is a maritime power. And while it's able to dominate its neighbors, okay, and establish an empire in Northern Africa and in Spain, it loses a lot of wars against the Greeks and the Romans who are just better warriors. Okay? But then the Carthaginians produce a man named Hannibal Barca. Hannibal Barca. And Hannibal Barca is considered by many military historians to be the greatest general who ever lived. As a military strategist, Hannibal had no competitor, okay? And Hannibal Barca, he hates Rome with a passion. He understands this. He understands that Rome is fundamentally an expansionist military power. Rome will not stop until it has conquered the world. So even though technically Carthage and Rome are at peace, eventually Rome will come for Carthage. So it's better to take a fight to Rome first than to wait for Rome to come to you. Now, Carthage at this time, it is basically a republic like Rome. It is run by something called Council of Elders. And these are the wealthiest citizens in Carthage. And there's elements of democracy and oligarchy as well, but it's primarily a republic, okay? It's run by these people. And these are merchants. These are wealthy people. War is bad for business, okay? So they were not supportive of Hannibal in his desire for war against Rome. So Hannibal did two things, okay? The first thing is he was in charge of silver mines in Spain. And what he did was he conquered a lot of Spanish territory for Carthage. And so he was able to amass more wealth. He took this wealth, he used it to basically bribe the Council of Elders to leave him alone and to support his military adventures in Spain. And again, these are business people. If it's profitable, they will support you. And then what Hannibal did was, he did something that was unimaginable before. He took his army and he crossed the Alps, okay? He crossed the Alps, so the Alps are here, into Italy. He is now at Rome's doorstep. And again, before Hannibal did this, it was thought impossible to cross the Alps, especially in winter, with an army, okay? But Hannibal did that. He lost a lot of men and elephants, war elephants, in his crossing, but he was able to cross. And when he crossed, he was able to summon allies to his side, okay? Because Rome was at war with everyone in Italy, and with the Gauls to the north with Italy and France, okay? So Rome had a lot of enemies. And so Hannibal was able to replenish his forces once he landed in Italy. He was also a very charismatic speaker, a great general. Okay? Rome heard of this, and at first Romans were shocked, but they weren't scared. Rome was a war machine. Okay? So they decided to an army against Hannibal. And army after army fell against Hannibal. Hannibal was able to defeat Roman soldiers and armies using superior military tactics and strategies, okay? The Romans decide, you know what? Here's what we're gonna do. We'll take 2 years off, and we're going to build the world's largest army. Okay? 80,000 men. And at this time, Hannibal had about 40,000 men. And then we'll take these 80,000 soldiers, and we'll just throw at Hannibal and crush Hannibal, and the war will be over. Okay? And that's the strategy. That's just the Roman way. Okay? The Romans are not creative. They are just brutal, bold, and direct. Okay? That's just their way of war. And so Hannibal meets this 80,000 soldier army at a place called Cannae. And they fight something called the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC. And this is the most famous battle in human history. Remember, the Romans outnumber Hannibal 2-1. And what Hannibal does is he decides on a place to face the Romans. Okay? And in this place, it's a small valley. And so even though the Romans are numerically superior because the valley is small, they're forced to march in a straight line as opposed in a wide line. Okay? If you have more numbers, you want to march in a wide line, but because of the geography, they're forced to march in a straight long line. Okay? So they're marching this way. Hannibal is uphill with his army, and he does something strange. He organizes his army not in a straight line, but in a concave line. Okay, like this, concave. And the Romans look at this and they laugh because they've never seen anything like this before. And they think it's a sign of weakness. It means the military under Hannibal is undisciplined. They're just amateurs. This will be over in an hour. Okay? So the Romans are marching confidently in against Hannibal. They're attacking. On the wings of both armies are the horsemen, the cavalry. Okay? So what happens as the Romans march against Hannibal is Hannibal sends his cavalry against the Roman cavalry, and they overwhelm the Roman cavalry. Okay? And now they're turning back in to attack the flank or the back. Meanwhile, the Roman attack is so powerful, the surge is so strong, that the concave of Hannibal's army turns upside down. Okay? It turns upside down. When it does so, it traps the Roman army in a circle. Okay? Do you see this? Okay? Now they are inside a circle and the army is coming around and attacking from the back. Okay? Militarily, we call this the double envelopment strategy. Okay? Double envelopment strategy. And so the Romans are circled completely, and what follows is the greatest massacre in history, militarily, until World War I. The army of 80,000 that the Romans said lost almost 70,000 men. 70,000 men died that day. And again, no military would lose so much men until World War I, when they had much larger armies, like millions of people, and when they had machine guns. All right? So this is like the greatest military disaster in human history up to this point. The disaster is so great that right now Rome has lost 20%, okay? 20% of its adult male population. To put that in context, in World War I, the Germans lost anywhere between 10 to 15% of their adult male population before they were forced to surrender to the Allies. Okay? So Rome has lost 20%. It's lost a third of the Senate. The Senate is the highest governing body of Rome. So a third of their leadership is dead. At the same time, Hannibal is able to convince the Greeks to start a second front against the Romans.
Cambio volumetriamente.
So at this point, the war is basically over. And Hannibal sends envoys to Rome and says, listen, the war is over. I'm willing to negotiate a peace settlement. I am willing to negotiate peace terms. And then something strange happens. And this is unique in human history, okay? The Roman Senate, they come together and they discuss the situation. It's bleak. It's hopeless. But they're Romans. Romans do not surrender. So, the Senate told Hannibal, we will continue the war. We will raise another army. If you want to come attack us, come. We'll be ready for you. And this is completely unexpected, okay? Hannibal does not know what to do. And this war continues, and this again is 216. This war continues for another 15 years, and then 15 years later, the Romans have won. They destroyed the Carthaginian presence in Spain, and they conquered, and they landed in Africa and forced Carthage to surrender. All right? Okay, so this is a mystery. Why did the Romans not surrender? And how were the Romans able to defeat not just the Carthaginians, but also the Greeks? And also, like, everyone else. Okay? Because at that time, Hannibal basically united the entire world against Rome, and Rome, in the end, even though it was very costly, right? They did win. So that's a mystery. Okay? So, first thing we need to understand is traditional military doctrine about who wins wars is basically wrong. Traditionally, we understand the military about three things. Okay? Manpower. How many soldiers do you have? Technology. How good are your weapons? And resources. How wealthy are you? Okay? Traditionally, we've understood war making. Like, if you're good at war, you will have these three things, okay? Lots of soldiers, lots of technology, and lots of money. And if you analyze it this way, then Rome should be no match against Carthage, right? Carthage is a lot wealthier. It has more technology. It has the greatest general in Hannibal. But then at the same time, the Athenians should not have been able to defeat the Persians. At the same time, Alexander and the Macedonians should not have been able to defeat the Persians. In fact, throughout human history, we have a lot of instances, cases where smaller armies have been able to defeat much larger armies. So think of Genghis Khan, think of Muhammad, okay? So clearly this is wrong. But if this is wrong, what is the better way to understand military strength? Well, I would argue how strong military is based on three criteria. The first is cohesion. Do the soldiers like and identify with each other? Are they united? Okay? Cohesion. Second is the idea of discipline. How well trained and experienced are they? And the third is devotion. How committed are they to winning? Okay? So if you want to see how powerful a nation is militarily, you have to ask yourself these three questions. Are they cohesive? Are they disciplined? Are they devoted? Okay? And I would also argue that each nation has a certain culture, a certain value system, which gives it a certain character. And this character will tell you if they're likely to win a war now. Okay? Alright, so let's examine briefly the character.
Vaya al lago. Vamos al lago.
Sí, ¿qué decir ahora?
¿Cuándo queréis ir vos? Dame 15 minutos.
Bueno, yo me aviso rápido. Sí, media hora.
Sí, media hora, tranquilo, sin apuro.
Dale.
Chau.
Chao. Characteristics of Rome as opposed to the Greeks and the Carthaginians. Okay? So let's do a table. Let's just say, okay, you have Greeks, you have Carthage, you have Rome. Alright, we know a lot about the Greeks. And there are three major concepts that define Greek culture. Okay? Alright, so the first question is, what makes you a good person? For the Greeks, it was the idea of arete. And arete just means excellence. You could be an asshole, you could be a jerk, but you can arete, like you have talent, and you're a good person. Okay? And the arete that the Greeks are most concerned about is the ability to speak well and the ability to fight well. Okay? That's arete. Second is, what is the thing that matters, okay? The most valuable thing in your life. Well, why do you fight? Well, for the Greeks, it was the idea of freedom. Okay? And for them, the idea of freedom means the ability to speak your mind in front of your peers. Okay? The freedom of speech, basically. And the last question for the Greeks is, what is the purpose of life? Okay? And here the Greeks have an easy answer. It's eudaimonia. Remember, eudaimonia is Greek for flourishing. You can only be happy as a person if you are achieving your true potential, if you are flourishing as a person.
¿Es posible que Richtofen nos trajera aquí solo para que sus aliados malignos nos atraparan?
So, that's Greek culture. And if you think about it, this explains why the Greeks were the most creative civilization in human history, right? They're very creative. At the same time, they're also very selfish, right? And that's why they were never able to come together, except in times of national emergency, like when the Persians invaded. And only then, but even then, only a few of the Greek city-states came together, and some even joined the Persians, okay? So the Greeks are notorious for being creative, but also for being selfish. So that's Greek culture. Now let's look at the Carthaginians. Okay? Now, unfortunately, we don't know anything about the Carthaginians. The reason why is Rome wiped Carthage out of history, okay? Rome destroyed Carthage, killed everyone, and erased Carthage from the history books. But we do know they are a mercantile empire, meaning they're focused on trade. We also know that in their political system, it's the American citizens with the most political power. Okay? And so they are basically a merchant culture, a mercantile culture. And from that, we can make certain guesses about their value system. Okay? So, what is good for the Carthaginians? It's the idea of being lucky, right? You succeed in life if you're lucky. That's how business people, right? That's why they're very superstitious.
Qué mogólico,
The
boludo.
Carthaginians are notorious for being extremely religious and superstitious. And one example of this is, of all these major civilizations, the Carthaginians are known for practicing human sacrifice. In fact, in times of war, they will even go as far as practicing child sacrifice, killing children and sacrificing them to the gods in return for divine favor in times of war, okay? So they are known for focusing on fortune and luck. What do they care about? They care about their own interests, right? What's profitable? What's their purpose in life? Accumulating wealth. Right? Does that make sense? Because these are business people. They're merchants. So that's how they structure their society and their culture. And that's why, for most of their history, they were extremely wealthy. Okay? They're notorious for being extremely clever business people who made a lot of money for themselves. Okay? Rome, let's go to Rome, okay? What is good for them? What's a good person? It's just piety. Piety just means duty to the gods, to the city, Rome, and to your father, okay? They believe heavily in filial piety. The best person was someone who practiced filial piety. What did they think was most valuable in their lives? Is the idea of liberty. Okay? But liberty is a different conception
No había tomado
for
esto,
Romans
no había
and for
tomado.
the Greeks.
Móvil,
Remember,
coño,
for
sí me
the
tengo que
Greeks,
entonces.
what mattered
Pero
was
tener ahí
the
pelota.
opportunity and the ability to speak your mind in front of your peers, okay? That's what freedom was. The Romans believed liberty was about respecting the law, institution, and the history of Rome. But it is only by respecting the law could you be free. Otherwise, we all just be savages, okay? That's the conception of liberty. Now, the next question then is, what's the purpose of life? And for the Romans, what really matters to them is the idea of re capitale. Re capitale is in Latin. And it's translated as usually public virtue, for the public good. Okay, and this is where we get the term the public from. And so for Romans, the highest honor, the highest privilege, the purpose of life was to serve Rome and make it stronger and better. Okay, does that make sense? Standing for political office and being head of the military was the highest honor Rome could bestow on you. That was the entire point of your life. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So if we just do a compare contrast, we can easily figure out, it's the Roman political system that will allow them the most cohesion, discipline, and devotion in their military. And therefore, over time, in a war, the Romans should be able to defeat both the Carthaginians and the Greeks. Okay, does that matter? Sorry, does that make sense to you? Okay. Any questions so far? Is this clear, my argument? Carthaginians. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Any questions so far? Is this clear, my argument? Carthaginians. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, Rome in the Third Punic War from 149 to 146, they would go and destroy Carthage. They would burn it to the ground. And then they would burn all the books that Carthage ever produced. So we don't have anything written by them. But we have a lot written by Greeks and Romans, right? And the Greeks and Romans were always in conflict with the Carthaginians. And what's interesting for us is, before all the conflict started in about 300 BCE, the Romans and the Greeks had nice to say about the Carthaginians. Okay? They were good fighters, they were brave, they were very prosperous. Carthage was like the wealthiest city in the world. Okay? They had all these praises for Carthage. And after, when the war started between the Carthaginians and the Romans, then they focused on like child sacrifice. The Carthaginians were offended the gods because they practiced child sacrifice, which is barbaric, and that's why the gods smited Carthage. Okay? Remember, back at this time in history, we didn't believe in human agency. Everything was ordained by the gods. Okay, so the Carthage is destroyed, and because the gods rule. And the gods rule because the Carthaginians practiced child sacrifice. Okay, and that's what the Romans and the Greeks insisted. Of course, that means we have to be skeptical of what they say, right? But at the same time, we've done a lot of archaeological excavations around Carthage, and we have found human remains that show signs of human sacrifice. Okay, so we have also Carthage comes from Phoenicia, right? We know about Phoenician culture. And so we've lost a lot of information about Carthage, but we're able to piece them back together slowly. Does that make sense? Okay, but again, unfortunately, we know nothing about their culture. Right? We don't know nothing about their literature, about their mythology, about their religion, because it's all been destroyed. Her writing has all been destroyed by the Romans. Okay. So these three characteristics that define the Roman identity, right? Piety, liberty, and Republica. I want to explain them slowly, okay? So, what the Romans really did well is they basically created history as mythology. Okay? So the Greeks separated mythology from history. Mythology is what the Greeks did, history is what humans did. Okay? So basically the Greeks invented history. The Romans, they basically outed their history into mythology. Their history became their religion, okay? So let me explain what I mean by that. So, there are legends that surround the founding of Rome. So Rome was supposed to be founded in 753 BCE by Romulus. Okay? And there are legends surrounding Romulus. There are lots of legends surrounding Romulus. But the idea is this. There's a king, and he was overthrown by his brother. And the brother banished the king's daughter into a temple to be a virgin for the rest of her life. But then she got pregnant. And then so the brother says to the king's daughter, "Why are you pregnant?" And the daughter says, "I was visited by Mars, the god of war, and he impregnated me." Okay. The king's brother obviously does not believe her, so he banishes her, and he orders for the twins who are born to be killed. Okay? But as the case with these legends, the person charged with killing the twins takes pity on them, and somehow they are left to die in the woods. A she-wolf, a wolf, comes and nurses them before another shepherd comes and adopts them. Okay? Eventually, they realize who they are, and they help the king overthrow the brother and take back the throne. Now the brothers are asked to go and basically found their own city. So they go to Rome, and it's all just hills, right? And they decide this is the place to build their kingdom because there's a river, the Tiber, and there are all these hills that provide good defense. Okay? The problem is this, they're twins, there's two of them, Romulus and Remus. So, and only one can be king. So they get into a battle, and Romulus kills Remus. Okay? And that's the founding legend of Rome. And from this legend, we can sort of understand or make some extrapolations about the Roman psychology. They believe that violence is at the core of human existence, right? I mean, sometimes you have to kill your own brother, and that's the right thing to do because that is ordained by the gods. Okay? So that's the first legend. The second legend is this. Romulus has to build Rome, and he becomes a very open person. He welcomes immigrants into Rome. He grants them citizenship and status right away. Okay? Rome becomes a nation of immigrants. Eventually, their rise startles their neighbors, and their neighbors go to war with them at once. The Romans are so good at war that they fight back the neighbors. The neighbors are called the Sabines. The Sabines decide, listen, get them in war, but at the same time, Rome only has males, right? Rome only has males. So we will just isolate Rome. Our daughters will not marry into Rome, and in 20 years' time, Rome will have no population, okay? Romulus hears of this plan, and he devises a strategy. What he organizes a huge festival with those neighbors. So fathers bring their daughters to attend this festival. At this festival, the women are kidnapped. And they're basically raped. That night, Romulus visits every one of these women and apologizes for what has happened and promises that they will be safe in Rome. That they are now citizens of Rome and therefore they will be protected by him personally, the king. The fathers and the brothers are obviously very upset about this. So they organize this huge army and they march against Rome. The Roman citizens come out to face them in battle. Okay? And just as they're about to clash in battle, the women come and run between them and beg the new husbands and their fathers and brothers not to fight. At this point, Romulus appears and says he will make everyone a citizen of Rome. Okay? And by doing that, he basically doubled the population of Rome. All right? Again, from this legend, we can understand the Roman psychology, which is everything can be sacrificed in the pursuit of Roman glory. And basically, to ensure that Rome survives, okay? Because what matters is Rome, okay? It's a cult of Rome. All that matters is survival of Rome. Morals don't matter.
¿Qué quiere?
Nothing matters. All that matters is survival of Rome.
¡Ah!
So after this, Rome starts to grow slowly. And this is a period known as the
¡Ah!
So there's 7 kings who and they do
¡Ah!
and most of them are
Mismo estaría bien tener algo
No,
de beber.
¿era el 7? Deja costado.